Welcome to the Warships Podcast with your host, Kellorn, Venicera, and Arun.
Hello and welcome to episode 129 of the Warships Podcast. I'm your host, Kellorn, and today my co-hosts Venicera and Arun join me as we have a host of new information to discuss. Pun intended. First up, last Friday I was honored to be on the Wargaming live stream with them and Emily. The stream was featured on the Twitch front page, something that they hadn't mentioned to me before I got to there. So when RadarX sat me down in the office and had the stream up, I was pretty blown away to see 13,000 people watching Femininely and Sub Octavian on the stream, and as they dropped a whole load of new info about the game. And, 5,000 to 8,000 of you continue to watch as Femininely and I played some games together. So were you guys surprised to see how many people were interested in watching that stream at that time?
Honestly, no. Well, yes, because in the past there haven't been that many people watching, but I kind of feel like a game this different deserves something like that at least. Because, to be honest, World of Warships plays unlike any other multiplayer game, really. It's like there isn't really anything even comparable. I suppose the War Thunder thing could be, but that's even still. Like the distances you're dealing with aren't quite the same.
Yeah, or Steel Ocean, but yeah, we'll not talk about that one. No, it was good. It was good to see. It was, anytime you get Sub Octavian around, a lot of people get interested really quick. But no, it's good. The game, it's been around for a while, but it's one of those that kind of picks up. I kind of look at it the same as, World of Tanks. World of Tanks kind of started and kind of snowballed as it just, got older and more refined, more tanks came out. And, I feel like World of Warships is eventually going to get there too.
It does seem to be on a bit of an upward trend. I guess the other good news is that, they were talking a bit afterwards, and it sounds like they may be doing, instead of doing like weekly streams or multiple streams a week where they get only a few people watching, they're going to do these like one stream a quarter like this, which honestly, I feel like that's more likely to bring people into the game, to have huge things like that where people open up Twitch and see, what is that? What is that cool thing? What is that cool game that they're playing, rather than it being kind of, in the dustbin.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it just, the game's just going to get more refined and just better as we go along. And I think, when you can get that one big spotlight on it, Arun's right. It is a game that is very much different than anything else you're really going to see out there. And I think it's going to, maybe appeal to a different crowd a bit than what you see, most games trying to appeal to.
So let's talk a little bit about what they talked about on the stream. And
could I interject?
Yeah, go for it.
I just want to mention something. I think right now, World of Warships has more viewers than Tanks at this current moment as we're recording this. It's 5.5.
Has that ever happened?
Well, right now.
Wow, that's a big deal.
It is.
Well, guys, I really do hope that this game is kind of in the upsurge, and it seems to be doing well. They are, in a bit of an off-topic thing real quick, there is going to be a CC Summit this year. The invites are out. I don't know that any of us were invited this year, due to the fact that we were invited last year. Arun, have you heard anything from the EU side?
I have not.
Yeah, I think they were really focusing on getting new people out there, even though you're like a hop, skip, and a jump from the location.
Yeah, but in terms of cost, the actual travel probably isn't even the biggest part. So I think it makes sense to pick up new people just because the event kind of ties the contributors together more than anything. I mean, it's not like we need to be there to receive information about the game, right?
No, but it was a really special event, and I think that it's really cool that they said, it worked last year, and we're going to do it again this year. So, I mean, future years we may see it happen more. But back to the stream. The first ship announcement that they made is Smolensk as a Tier 10 Russian cruiser with 16 destroyer size 130 millimeter guns, and I believe that they're actually the guns of Khabarovsk. It is relatively short range with an absurd rate of fire. This ship will spew HE shells all over the place with an absurd theoretical 384,000 HE DPM stock. With an 8% fire chance per shell, she'll set 17 fires per minute. But, that's theoretical fires per minute. Not there's going to be fire resistance and things that are in the game.
That's like 50%, 50% more than a ZAO, I believe.
Right, and yeah, I think you can compare it to kind of like if you thought Worcester was a flamethrower. I think Smolensk takes it to an entirely another level. She does come with a Russian style smoke, and Nears makes no difference, no armor, as far as I can tell. I'm honestly a little worried that this ship might literally be game breaking in the form that they have first presented her in. I mean, Aaron, you're the one that has crunched a lot of these HEDPM numbers about, like things like Harugamo and Des Moines and Salem and that kind of stuff. Is this ship worrying to you with what we know on paper so far?
No, not really, because it's a Soviet DD, meaning that the community is going to complain about how OP it is, regardless whether it is or isn't. So it's probably going to get nerfed anyway.
Well, it's a cruiser, so it's going to have a Citadel.
Yeah, sure, but yeah, I guess actually that makes the situation, I don't even know. It makes the situation better, I guess, because it means that the cruiser is going to be somewhat limited unless it has like battleship armor, which for Soviet ships isn't always out of the question, I suppose.
Like I said, as near as I can tell, she's literally going to have no armor. She's going to have 16 millimeter extremities. So she's going to be able to be overmatched by pretty much all the cruisers at Tier 10, right through the bow. I do think that it's going to be a very vulnerable ship, but while it's alive, it looks to be pretty scary. This archetype of ship, is this something that you enjoy playing, Vanessa, or is it this more of something like I have a hard time with these really, really fragile ships because I have a hard time staying alive in them?
Yeah, I was just kind of thinking to all the times in Atlanta and Worcester and Minotaur, and it's going to kind of be along those same lines. It's going to be really annoying when you're on the receiving end. It's going to be really annoying when you try and shoot at the person and you have really poor dispersion. And then also when you hit them and like your shell just overpens because, they have paper armor. But there are also going to be those times when you just shoot at them and, they go away because you just citadel them to death. These ships are very much interesting, to say the least, because they're so fragile. Yes, you definitely do die, but they're really much, or they can be a bit of a game changer. I'm betting the AA potential on this is going to be, pretty decent. I'm looking at over the stats at the moment. Those guns are going to be interesting. I'm very curious to test this ship out, but like anything, if you try and sit in the smoke with this, people who are good at shooting into smoke are just going to make this thing disappear. So you're going to be hugging islands and really trying to annoy people, just like you would with the Worcester or a Minotaur. I think the biggest thing with this one is, it's probably not going to have the shell arcs to be able to really farm behind an island. So that might be a little difficult with it. It's probably why they gave it smoke, but yeah.
I mean, she has 950 meter per second shell velocity with a 2.0 Sigma. So, I mean, you're right. It's going to be more railgun stuff. And honestly, this is not a small ship. I mean, looking at the picture of the model, it looks at least to be, pretty close to Moskva size from what I can tell. Maybe a little smaller than that, maybe more like Chepev or Donskoy size. But it doesn't look like it's going to be a hard ship to hit even when it's in its smoke.
Yeah, there's definitely that. And I'm curious with the firing angles with the rear turrets. Will you be able to, have a pretty decent defensive posture while be able to bring all the guns to bear? Or, how How is?
I think defensive posture in this ship is going to be going full broadside and hoping they overpen you.
Yeah, I. Well, there is one bright side of it. It's got torpedoes, 8 kilometers, so it'll look pretty decent.
How about you, Aaron? Is this a ship that you look at and say, that's a ship I want to play?
Most of the time, no. But that's because it's going to be fragile. So it's not going to be consistent. You'll have excellent games in her, but you'll also have games where you feel like, why am I playing the game right now? I probably shouldn't play the game at all. So I don't know. I usually don't enjoy these kinds of mixed bags as much. But sometimes it is quite fun, especially if you get that nice matchmaking.
Fair enough. Well, let's move on to the next ship, which is the French Tier 10 Destroyer Colbert. I am probably slaughtering it horrifically, so our French listeners, please, call and make fun of me. She does not get a smoke, but does get engine and reload boost, which makes her similar to the other French destroyers that we've seen. And she's a bit of a unique destroyer with 2 triple torp launchers on each side. I honestly have, looking at the stats and looking at the model, I have no idea how this ship will perform in game. It's very odd. We do have this one set to test, which we will do over the next week, and we'll talk a little bit more about it next week. But do you think this is something like Khabarovsk, Arun, or how would you play this ship?
Do you want an honest answer? I think we can't actually tell because the ship is going to get nerfed. Why? Because I'm playing it right now. I have 18.9 kilometers range. I don't know what I picked in terms of skills, but 19 kilometers range on a destroyer. That goes, I don't know, I'm turning right now and I'm going 50 knots, so...
Whoa, what?
That's okay, right
that's
now
absurd.
It's going... Yeah. The fire, I guess it doesn't have a heal, which at tier 10 is something that matters, and the fact that she also... her concealment seems pretty decent, though, but her firepower isn't the greatest, although she does have a reload booster, so I guess that compensates for it. But, I mean, the range and actually being able to hit battleships at this range is kind of absurd, because you're not going to be able to hit a DD that's going... You don't even need to use speed boost. I think even... I'm guessing I have AFT and the range upgrade. Even if you drop the range upgrade, or AFT, or probably even both, you would still have enough range that with speed boost, or perhaps even without, she goes like 45 or 46 knots without, she would be fast enough to simply dodge almost everything. So when you add all of this stuff up, at range, I don't know what can possibly really hit her. So her only downside seems to be that she isn't like magic Haruguma levels of DPM, but she does seem to set some fires. So I don't know. This ship seems kind of wild.
What does that make you think, Vanessa? You're kind of our more destroyer player.
Well, I'll have to get my hands on it and see. I'm not a huge fan of the destroyer or the French or Russian destroyers. So their gameplay and style is a bit different than what I kind of prefer and like. But, I'll test it out, and kind of like with Terrible, just kind of, sometimes it feels a bit ridiculous, and other times it's like, wow, no, this ship really needs some help. So it just sounds silly with what you're just saying, and I kind of want to jump into a game, but I'll wait till after the show to test it.
We've been getting these kind of like ridiculously fast ships lately, particularly out of the French ships, Arun. Like, I feel like it's harming a bit of the real. I mean, obviously we're playing an arcadey type of game and it's not realistic, but there are certain parts of this game that I do enjoy being more realism based. And I feel like this is one of those things that really harms that for me.
I think what they need to do instead is tone down the speed values and adjust the scaling factor, so to say. Because I think the reason why they're making these speed differences is because I think the way their aim assist algorithm works, it's helpful. Like, the helpfulness of it diminishes when ships get above like 40 knots, and those really fast ones become really, really difficult to hit with the aim assist. Well, it can kind of screw you over. And I think the reason why they make ships that fast is because it makes it more fun to play. And I think they could just achieve the same thing by simply having lower speed values, but just making because obviously the ships in the game move much faster than they would in real life. I mean, if you have a map that's 20 kilometers across and you're going, let's say, 60 kilometers an hour, it would take you 20 minutes to get from one end to the other. Obviously, that's not the case in the game, so there is some compression there. And I believe that they could simply adjust that value and just try to preserve some of the historical numbers, I guess, more. Also, Shimaka's speed, please, can you give it back to her?
Yeah, it does. It does. It is a little amusing that Shimakaze was specifically designed to be the fastest ship in the world, and she's nowhere near it in the game.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I think that's wrong.
Alrighty, any last thoughts on Colbert before we move on?
Not really, I guess. She does seem like a nice ship, but I don't know. She seems a bit too much out there for her to be added to the game like she is.
Well, I mean, keep in mind, guys, these are work in progress ships. They are things that are being tested. So just because it's absurd right now doesn't mean that it will stay that way when it's released. So next up from the stream, they talked about the USN Tier 10 Destroyer Somers, which is technically a destroyer leader, which is a ship used to command a flotilla of destroyers. Now, different navies did this in different ways. The IJN used light cruisers like Kuma to be their destroyer leaders. The United States Navy built specific destroyers that were bigger than the other ones that they termed destroyer leaders. And this ship is actually a pretty interesting addition to the game because she has 12 centerline mounted torpedoes, 4 gearing style gun mounts. So she has one more gun than gearing, and a smoke screen. And I really feel like this is kind of like a super gearing type of ship. And honestly, I feel like it might be a really compelling, balanced torpedo and gunboat that right now I feel like that balanced ship area for destroyers is really kind of lacking.
I am super excited for this ship. Damn near giddy. Just looking at it, seeing what it has to offer, though I think Wargaming might have the twin 127 millimeter 5-inch guns be surface only, not dual purpose. Because I'm kind of reading up on the class, and that was one of the things that when the guns were originally designed, they were only surface oriented. They weren't dual purpose, and they had to change them later throughout the war. So I'm wondering if Wargaming might balance that a little bit, because as it stands right now, you have a quote-unquote destroyer that is actually kind of more along the line of, the Russian cheese that we see on those destroyer lines. But you essentially have a ship that on paper kind of outclasses the gearing. So I'm kind of curious how they are going to balance it compared, with the other USN destroyer.
I know how. The answer is they aren't. I mean, that's usually how it goes, though, right? We had just slight power creep all the time, and then ships that seem to keep being left behind, they'll get slight buffs here and there. I think it's not necessarily that bad, even. It seems like an okay idea to me. But from what I've heard, it does seem like gearing might need a helping hand in comparison.
Yeah, I mean, you look at, what this ship is offering. Obviously, it's going to be, a little bit bigger. So it's probably, going to take damage a little bit more frequently. It's probably going to get penned a lot more than, say, gearing. And gearing's pretty notorious, for taking pen damage because of its wide hull. So I'm sure, defensively, the Somers might be a little, more difficult. But the firepower that you're bringing and the fact that it is offering the two different options of either, Fletcher upgraded torps for a more spammy approach, or you still have the 16-kilometer torpedoes, but you have 3 quad racks of torpedoes. So you could really stagger those out and, do some crazy aerial denial with that, or you just straight spam them intermittently to just constantly have, every probably 45 seconds or so, have a wave of torpedoes coming out. So there's so many different things that you could do with this. And even if you don't have, the AA or speed boost with this, it should be fast enough and you got smoke.
I guess I just look at this right now and I see a lot of firepower in a destroyer hull. And Gearing already has a pretty decent amount of firepower between its guns and its torpedoes. And I don't know how you balance this, which is, it's really just a bigger kind of Gearing and, on paper. How do you balance, a ship that is going to be in the same tier?
I'm not sure how much you need to necessarily balance it, because you can always just play with like these softer values. And on top of that, you also have the takes more damage aspect. If you think about like more competitive type gameplay, for example, ranked or clan battles or even the tournaments, obviously the main thing that people always go for is survivability, or almost always the main thing. And I feel like, she probably doesn't fit that niche quite as much. And perhaps maybe we'll get some boosts to anti-air and stuff, so they could differentiate between the ships through that. Although right now, I don't think plus 30% more anti-air would make any difference on a DD, but perhaps in the future.
Yeah, like I said, this isn't one that we have access to for testing this week, but I am really curious to see how this is going to turn out while we do our testing. So the last one that they talked about on stream is a Tier 5 destroyer. So we had these 3 Tier 10s, and now we have a Tier 5. That's Hill, and it's another U.S. destroyer. And it has 9 relatively short-range torpedoes and 5 USN Destroyer guns at Tier 5. And all in all, she really looks like she's a pretty fun SEAL clubbing type of ship. And again, it's like, I feel like this is another ship like the Somers we just talked about that's kind of just straight better than the regular ships in the research ships in its tier.
Is it though? Because the Nicholas is pretty damn amazing ship though.
Well, I mean, you are our preeminent, that's the word I'm looking for, preeminent Nicholas player, are you not, Aaron?
I'm not so sure about that one, but I definitely did play her a little bit, and I don't know. The destroyers at lower tiers feel kind of crazy, though, compared to some of the other ship classes, so I don't know how much we want more power there, though.
I guess, do you feel like I'm wrong? Do you feel like this is a more balanced ship? Do you feel like the destroyers in that Tier 5 measure up to Hill the way she stands right now?
Well, I suppose it depends. Torpedoes tend to be very powerful in the lower tiers of gameplay, so maybe not quite.
Yeah, I would really have to test this and kind of see how it plays out, comparative, and just really put quite a few games in her.
Yeah, we'll definitely have to see how this one turns out, but I'm a little worried, again, based just on what we see on paper. And honestly, this is one of those things where we've been seeing some of these ships when they're first announced on paper. HMS Exeter comes to mind, where she was absolutely ridiculous. And just looking at the stats on paper, you could tell that it was completely ridiculous. And as soon as we got our hands on it, it was absolutely ridiculous. And now, they kind of nerfed her into oblivion. And I really wonder how much that is likely to happen with the 4 ships we just talked about.
Well, I think they're not going to get nerfed to oblivion, but they might be nerfed, yeah.
I would say the likelihood on the USN ones, 99.9%. The Russian one, probably not.
It's a little cynical.
Balance, comrade, balance.
Speaking of Russians, next up, they announced a new special commander coming for the Russian Navy, Nikolay Kuznetsov, which is one of their more famous admirals. And he has 2 talents. Hidden Reserve, which activates when obtaining the First Blood achievement and gives 1 charge of all consumables of the ship. This is very similar to Yamamoto. And also similar to Yamamoto, the talent Will to Win, which activates once per battle if the ship HP drops below 10% and gives the following bonuses for 10 seconds. The effect of the damage control party consumable is applied to the ship without spending a charge. The dispersion of shells fired by the enemy increases by 20%. and the effective repair party regenerating up to 7.5% HP without spending a repair party consumables. These talents do not work in clan battles. He also gets a 10% Jack of all trades instead of 5%, which does work in clan battles. And honestly, this is one of those things where it's a pretty powerful set of abilities, and even better than Yamamoto's abilities because it will trigger every game, or almost every game, as long as you don't get nuked from like 12% to nothing. So I'm not really upset to see them lock it out of clan battles, but this is a pretty crazy commander when you get right down to it.
Are there like tier limits to the commander or anything like that?
It doesn't say so.
Because I'm thinking like, sure, she'll be fine at the higher tiers. I don't really see a problem. But at lower tiers, for example, I don't know, you're playing like, what's the tier 8 Soviet cruiser, the Chapayev, that does not have a heal. Now, suddenly you do technically have some heal, right? Or does it not work if your ship doesn't have a heal? Or
It
what?
doesn't say. But it does. From what I understand, it doesn't really look like it is locked out if you don't have a repair party.
Oh man, I know the perfect ship to use it on. Jesus, she's gonna be excellent for Orlan.
I'm kind of like sitting here with my jaw open. Like, you are an evil, evil person.
I mean, it's not like any other tier 1 ships are gonna have a heal, right? So that's gonna be a massive advantage.
Is that as dirty as it is in your mind as it is in mine, Vanessa? Like, is that like the nastiest seal clubbing thing you've ever heard?
Hold on, I'm still...
Vanessa's apparently lost it.
Oh my god. Yeah, so, yeah, perfect. Tier 1 clubbing. Balance all the way.
You know, they do explicitly mention that this commander could influence future unique commanders. And I guess, do you guys think that if it does come out in this form, what other things that of this nature where you see it where it will almost likely always trigger at the end of a game at 10%, what other things along those lines would you kind of imagine to be put in that could be put into the game?
Well, I don't know, but this kind of leads to, like when we talked about Yamamoto a long time ago when he was first introduced to the game, and that's the fact that any person running Soviet ships is, pretty much going to want this commander. In almost every occasion that I can think of, you're going to be, in my opinion, at a disadvantage if you don't have this commander. And it's going to lead to one of those, did the person win because they have skill, or did they win because they have something that a new player doesn't necessarily have? And therefore, it's kind of that classic, MMO type deal where, you go out there and you get stuff, but then, trying to make it competitive towards, someone who has everything and has a unique reward versus someone who's just starting and feeling like they can't compete. And that's one of the dangers that I worry about with these unique commanders when they really start to go with these abilities.
Also, I have a question. You said that it won't work in clan battles. Does that mean it works in ranked, though?
That's the way it reads, because it only calls out clan battles.
Oh my. Oh my.
Yeah, it's going to be really helpful for Soviet battleships, especially if you are trying to be aggressive, tank, and, get in there.
I agree that it's going to be great for Soviet battleships, because, I certainly agree that Stalingrad needed a buff, so here it is.
Yeah, I was thinking about it in terms of Stalingrad too, and being like, well, okay, I'll take it. The thing is, though, like, Stalingrad will often get farmed by HE ships, particularly Henri's and the other supercruisers, with their ability to get through its deck armor with their HE shells and do actual damage. So sometimes you play Stalingrad and it's really, really frustrating because all these people are farming you and you can't do anything about it.
Well, why don't you balance them instead with your guns?
So is this first world problems, Arun?
Pretty much.
Yeah, nothing that can't be solved with the proper application of stellenium.
Alrighty, well, there's a couple last announcements that they had from the stream, and those are that a new map is being added to the game called Greece for Tier 9 and 10 battles, and it is very island heavy, and it's inside the cap points, and it looks like it's based on the Aegean Sea. They also have some pretty cool port updates and some interesting new camouflages that will be available for copper and molybdenum, the currencies you get for clan battles and for ranked battles. Now, Arun, real quick, have you looked at this map, the Greece map? It's another one of these maps that is almost purely symmetrical, but it looks to me like it's a destroyer's delight.
Well, yes, but lots of islands also means that torpedoes aren't going to be always quite as effective, because other ships can also hug those islands, and this means that it's possible for them to maneuver around in a way where it's difficult to torpedo them. Also, my Shimakaze cries tears of 20 kilometers.
Well, I mean, you're the only one that actually runs 20 kilometers in torpedoes in their Shimakaze, so you're the only one, right?
Sure, but I think soon you're going to be playing a ship with 20-kilometer torpedoes.
We're going to talk about that in just a minute. Vanessa, is this style of map where it's very clearly delineated between the sides, is that something that you find as compelling gameplay?
I try and look at these maps, and I try and think, how I would approach them and how I would play them. And oftentimes it comes down to, where you spawn on the map and just kind of how you respond to, your starting position and kind of feeling out where the enemy is as well. And, sometimes you have to go with what the game throws your way. And, that's kind of one of the appealing things to it is, you might be on your favorite map, but you could be put into a really bad starting position, with forces or a composition that's not really favorable, or it's something that might get you out of your comfort zone as you're, trying to plan out what you want to do. And when it's perfectly symmetrical like that, I think that kind of takes away from, I don't want to say the randomness, but it just, I don't know, it seems different because I'm trying to think of like my favorite maps, like, North has been changed so much, but like Fault Line, or not Fault Line. Why can't I think of the name of it? It's a classic original, but it's got pretty asymmetrical approach to it. And sometimes you're put into a position where, you have to kind of go with what is thrown your way. You also have to deal with, what is your team doing? Sometimes you, especially as a destroyer player, might have to do things that you weren't really planning on, but you have to go with it because if you want to support the team and win, that's what you have to do to get the W. And, just kind of looking at this map and seeing, the symmetrical, yeah, it can be helpful for destroyers, but I also think it might be more helpful for light cruisers, and especially, those that are kind of set up to kind of hide, stalk, and set traps for destroyers. So we'll see.
Actually, I wonder if, like the images we saw, it had the spawns really close together. I wonder if that's actually going to be the case in the game though, because often we don't spawn that close together with other ships usually in the game. Like usually spawns are like across the entire map, and I think it would be nice if we didn't get that this time, because being the one ship that's out on the side, especially as a battleship in like a CV game, is quite annoying, because if everybody runs to the other side of the map on your team, by other side I mean like left or right, what ends up happening is that you're going to be singled out by the CV and you're just going to die. And I hope if we spawn together, maybe it's not quite as bad. Also, I'll say one thing though, even though it seems like the map might protect you rather well against DD torpedoes that come from the other side, if a destroyer somehow gets through to your side, you're going to be in a lot of trouble, because there's going to be this like 2 squares of area where almost all the heavy ships are going to be, and a 20-kilometer Shima torpedoing that might be quite dangerous and scary.
How likely is that, though, Arun, with the new CV rework? I mean, that's what it really comes down to, is that with the rework, you're getting these spotting of the destroyers that's really kind of destroying some of their gameplay. Their torpedoes aren't getting spotted anymore, but the ships themselves are not as free to operate as Shimas once were.
I mean, just torpedo the CV first. It's not like she's going to move anyway. But you do, jokes aside, you do bring up a good point. I guess if CVs are around, then you can't do that. And in that case, I don't think you're going to have a very good game. And I'm not sure what you could potentially do about it. And because it's not like the map gives you many options. I would guess like there might be more fighting on the right side by DDs then, because that's a place where they can actually torpedo through the cap zone. Whereas on like the left side, they can't do anything.
Well, that's a pretty good segue into our next topic, which is the topic of carriers, of course, which we pretty much have to talk about every week these days. The stream had a couple important announcements. And first, carriers will get a delay on launching their planes starting at Tier 6 and ramping up longer and longer at Tier 8 and Tier 10. Also, the reworked carriers will be eligible for the next season of ranked battles, which makes it almost certain that they'll be eligible for the next season of clan battles like we talked about with Strangers 123 last week. Arun, are these changes is that change to carriers, both with the launching delay, a big deal? And are they ready for a ranked primetime?
I mean, it can be a big deal, but nowhere near enough to make them ready for ranked primetime. The problems with the CVs are a lot more fundamental than any kind of small numerical changes are going to, change. The problems are with spotting and the rather annoying amount of focus you can do on a single ship. Now, I think in Ranked, actually, the last part might not matter as much, because in Ranked, you're playing to win more often, meaning that it doesn't really matter as much if the enemy CV spends like 10 minutes trying to kill you and doesn't quite succeed, because you're there after the win rather than having a great game. But on the other hand, spotting is still there, and if your side ends up being on the losing side, the CVs can pretty much pick the teams apart, and I don't think it's going to be quite as fun as Ranked was the last season. Well, for most players anyway. I'm gonna enjoy playing my CV though, because unless they significantly nerf them, I don't see how you shouldn't play CVs the next Ranked season.
I would mention one thing though about the Ranked. If you're playing to win and you're trying to spend quote unquote 10 minutes to, sink one ship. One of the biggest issues with Ranked and one of the biggest important factors with Ranked is destroyer gameplay. And carriers who are going to try and focus on destroyers, if they can take them out early on or deal significant damage or curtail them, it will invariably drag the matches on. It will cause a lot of salt, more or less. And I mean, it just, you're completely right about the spotting. But I think it's going to cause a lot of, the teams are going to have to ball up, to try and get, the new overlapping AA, bonuses or whatever the Venn diagram was showing on that. And it's just going to be overall more difficult. And I don't know how to address that. And I think you're completely right, Arun.
Of the changes that we've seen recently, Arun, do you think they're moving in the right direction? Or is it still at a point where you think that the whole thing should be reimagined?
Well, I mean, I don't think I don't think that any of this is the, how would you call it, important part in this, I guess? Because if we're honest, the spotting problem was there even before the rework. And it was a big deal even back then. It's just that the planes weren't quite as fast, so the way most carrier players played, it wasn't as big of an issue, because they simply didn't stick around to spot you the entire time. But they could have done that. And honestly, in that sense, I don't think it's the problem. I don't think it's the rework that's causing the big issue. Because even back then, focus fire was also a thing. And it was also as annoying as it is now, which in my opinion means that, again, it's not the reworks. Like, it's not the fault of the rework necessarily why the CVs are like this. Sure, the numerical things where the CVs deal a lot of damage and all those things. Yes, these are all things that the rework caused, because planes are much faster now. They're going to be much more likely to deal the damage, and the other CV can't block things. But it doesn't change, like, the main issues we still have with the CVs, and they were always there. And I think that this means the CV rework isn't at fault for the effect it's going to have on ranked anyway, at least not quite entirely. And so I think they're kind of moving in the right direction, but they need to address these things like spotting and focus fire, because this is something that, regardless what they do with the CVs, it's going to be there. And it's going to be one of the hardest things for them to balance if they don't get rid of it somehow.
I would say that it is part of the rework, because in the previous iteration, one flight group could only make one attack. Granted, you could stack all your flight groups and, make a series of attacks and pretty much annihilate a target. But with many carriers, you didn't really have that option, especially USN carriers. Now you have dive bombers or rocket planes that can make multiple passing attacks. You have a torpedo group that can line up, make an attack. You can turn to avoid it, and by the time you've fully committed to turn and avoid that, they've lined up their second attack, which at that point is almost difficult, if not impossible, to avoid, especially if you're in a bigger ship. So you're going to take damage one way or another. And yes, the spotting has always been an issue, but now you take multiple attack runs, from a carrier. And I think that is part of the rework, and that is part of the issue that I think that we're dealing with here. And I think balance-wise, the only thing I could really think of is if you do something akin to what they've been doing with the radar and having the delayed, feedback to other ships to be able to fire. Yeah, you can see it on the mini-map. The ship is there, but you can't necessarily shoot at it yet because it hasn't materialized information-wise on your screen. And it might be a way that they could balance it, but I don't know. With the multiple attacks and just how fast planes move, it's just, I do feel it's part of the rework.
Well, I would disagree there, because planes did a lot more damage back then, and while right now, when a plane does multiple attacks, you can at least maneuver. Before, they could literally just do a cross drop, and there is zero chance that you'll be able to do anything because the torpedoes will come at the exact same time.
With torpedoes, though, now we have rockets and dive bombs that are much, much more accurate and not RNG based like before.
I wouldn't quite agree there, because the dive bombers before were quite, the reason why I think Midway dive bombers are so powerful is because they really didn't change the dive bombers enough. Like, they didn't nerf the damage output of the dive bombers, because they were really powerful on the Midway before as well. It's just that the drop circle was a lot bigger, meaning that you would hit fewer bombs. But I think that the damage was there, like the potential to hit really, really hard. And if you look at the average statistics on average damage output by CVs, it's actually slightly decreased. For example, this is overall, so not anything recent, but overall, for example, the where is it? The top 5%. So we're talking decent-ish players. Hakuryu and Midway averaged 150k. So that's across the old Hakuryu and Midway. The newer ones are 167k from the Hakuryu. That's because of early on, the Hakuryu was absolutely insane. But Midway is at 144k, and Midway hasn't changed quite as much. And keep in mind that this, in both cases though, this includes periods where the ships were really overpowered. But I don't think the old CVs were ever as overpowered as, for example, the new Hakuryu ever was. And so I think that damage-wise, it hasn't got quite as bad. And I actually think spotting-wise, it's also not as bad as it used to be. The difference is that before, the way an average CV player played, the spotting didn't really exist because the strike would come all at once, it would strike all at once, and then the CV would go away and it would take like 5 minutes for them to come back. Whereas now, the spotting works in this way where the only way you can play is to keep the ship spotted for like the minute to minute and a half that it takes for you to attack, and then you'll come back again in like 40 seconds. And so the spotting happens like the way you play, you always spot the ships. However, in the past, you could have done the same. Like, you could literally pick, I don't know, your dive bombers on a ship that doesn't have very strong dive bombers, for example, and you could just linger it in the above a DD for like the entire game. And there's nothing the destroyer back then could do unless you're dealing with like an anti-air destroyer, like a Gearing. And so I think in terms of spotting, like the absolute top, it's probably about the same as it used to be. It's just that the average has become worse for most players. That is, the average CV spots more now. And I think that's why we see the spotting issue. But it was there the entire time.
I honestly do not feel that dive bombers, while attacking RNG-wise on destroyers, played as big as a part as they do now.
Oh yeah, you're definitely correct. But back then you used torpedo bombers and DDs anyway, so it doesn't really matter. And I mean, we once struck DDs quite often at the start of a game, for example.
So, one last thing before we move on to our last topic of the day. What do you guys expect out of the ranked season now that we're going to have carriers in it? Do you think there's going to be a carrier in every battle, or you think you're going to have to plan for that with your ship choices? Or do you think that it's going to be kind of catch as catch can?
Salt. Lots of salt with extra salt.
I think there won't be a carrier in every single battle because obviously CVs aren't still the most popular ships. Like when you queue up, you don't see like 500 CVs in queue because you obviously get fewer CVs than any of the other classes in a game. So I don't think we're quite going to see it in every game. But I think that if you have a good CV on your team, chances are that you're going to win because chances are good the enemy team doesn't have a great CV on their team. And I think CVs are going to have a bigger impact on the game than, well, normal. But then again, CVs were kind of similar in the past, even in ranked. It's just that CVs were unpopular, so you didn't see them quite as often. But if you had a good CV, chances were pretty good that even if the enemy CV was decent, your CV would simply outclass them, and the spotting would give you such an insane advantage that you would almost always, okay, maybe not almost always, but you would very often win just from the spotting alone. And I think that it's not really going to change. CVs are just going to have a much bigger impact than any other ship class. And like Vanessa said, salt. We're going to have so much salt that all the salt from the ocean is going to... okay, actually, it's not the salt in the ocean. We're going to take out the water in the ocean and just replace it with salt.
Giving a salty sea is a whole new meaning. So yesterday morning, we were credited with a huge list of new ships to test, including new versions of all the Soviet battleships and USS Georgia. But honestly, there was one ship above all the others that I absolutely had to play before the podcast this morning, and that's Yoshino. Yoshino. This ship has literally restored my faith in this game. I love this ship so much that it's absolutely unbelievable. You know, the 20-kilometer torps with the kind of just stupid torp angles. It's everything I wanted to play in a ship. It's everything that Azuma was when she was a tier 10, plus the torpedoes. So honestly, I just have to thank Wargaming because I love this ship so much and I cannot wait to play more of it. I'm a little frightened that they may tone her down a little bit, but it's just so much fun to play. You know, we'll have more in-depth analysis next episode as we've played more of these ships, but did you guys have any first impressions that you'd like to share of the test ships that we got yesterday?
I played the Yoshino. I didn't have the greatest game. A battleship shot at me once, and well, my HP just went away. I took like a 40k salvo, but I don't think it's because of the ship. I just think I got unlucky and I played kind of poorly. The ship itself seems kind of cool, though. The 20-kilometer torpedoes I definitely approve of. It's quite something on a cruiser like this. I think I hope that she is something of an example of what's more to come, because I kind of enjoy when these cruisers have like really long range torpedoes, because they can actually use it to like zone out ships, and I think that's kind of cool. And,
it's hilarious how often
probably
people
quite
run
annoying.
into those things, by the way.
Yeah, exactly. Even though you spot them from like 2.5 kilometers and they only go 62 knots, but for some reason people still get hit. I think that's kind of cool, and I definitely approve of this ship. The guns also feel quite nice, so I don't know. Can't really complain about her too much. At least I didn't find anything that was
her AP
really lacking.
Against some of the cruisers in the game is so cruel.
Yes. Senjo is finally back in the game, now improved with bigger guns.
Bigger hull,
She's
too,
got a
though.
pretty thick ass. I have to, maybe even a fat ass with the PH at the front.
Yeah, I totally cannot wait to test this ship out. In fact, I'm like, can we like wrap up the show so I can get to testing it?
Yes, we can wrap up the show. Did you guys have anything else before we close out for the day?
What?
No questions this week, because
what is this?
That's my fault. I didn't get the request for questions off.
Okay, well, you'll have to make it double next time.
I mean, yeah, we could just like wall or cordon off half the show so we can just answer questions. Well, that's it for this week, folks. We do have that new spot on the NA forums just for the Warships Podcast. Be sure to check that out for news and posts, as well as a place to ask your questions that you can we'll answer on the podcast. Check for that link in the description as well. As always, follow us on Facebook at facebook.com/Warships Podcast and Twitter at Warships Podcast for updates between episodes. Don't forget to check out Arun on YouTube and Twitch as well. We, of course, want to thank our amazing Patreon backers. If you're interested in supporting us, please consider becoming a backer yourself. You guys are what make the podcast possible. Take care, everyone, and we'll see you next week.